Julie here, Sarah Stellus. This is part two of my Alcyone Uranus at 0 degree Gemini, and the fact that Alcyone is in 0 degree Gemini. So I was stopping at a really powerfully challenging part of the story. Now is Mercury 22ing about cockroaches and how a part of my lineage was really considered the cockroaches, but in the Second World War. So the Jews and the Slavs were considered like the pests, but also the noting that there was stories of sexual boundary violations to do, at least with my patrilineal lineage, for my grandfather's side that survived the Holocaust, and how the um, the honoring of every living creature and the oscillation between that and exterminating with gas um, can have to do with those pre pre good and bad phases with Gemini, where there is the pre-linguistic, the pre-good and bad, the people that live, let's say, in rural places or even secluded and survived by doing what they had to do to get by, and then that was creating a state of overwhelm, which essentially ended in not really mass euthanasia, because we can't say that the Holocaust or dining in the camps was euthanasia, um, but it's also discontinuing a certain physical incarnation, um, and that entire combination of gas, cockroaches, um, oscillating between honoring every living being and exterminating all of them with gas that I experienced even as a child, as an adolescent, basically tackling roaches issues in our grandparents' house. So, and I ran into that following a short that was commenting on Nietzsche, saying that if you kill a cockroach, you're a hero. If you kill a butterfly, you're a villain. And so it said that the morality has an aesthetic, and it immediately up jumped. I remembered that story where I was trying to honor the cockroaches and looked at them as they were growing and so on and so forth. But then they began to overwhelm, and then I killed them with gas. And that is and this is also where this almost frightening oscillation between honoring something supposedly regardless of its form, or honoring the forms that were, and being able to see the beauty of, let's say, a new cockroach is born, and honoring that, and then the total extinction that that pertains, where even if butterflies would flood the apartment and the shoes and so on and so forth, there would be a necessity to set a boundary regardless of the form. And so so there's something in the beginning of the it, I wouldn't say cells mutating, but the division of cells, or the um, the beginning of constituents, or beginning of treating things as constituents, that comes to emerge with Gemini, and the question of, if you think about Taurus being the land, Gemini is this liminal space between the land and the sea, which is the air, but it's also not the air. It's not the liminal space where between above and below. It is the land and the sea, but Taurus is not a mutable land. So what is Gemini? Because the next sign up is Cancer, and that's the sea or the lake. Um, is it the air by the sea? But then Taurus is not a mutable land. So what are we arguing in Gemini? Because in Gemini there is this devil advocate, and we can't ignore Alcyone as the 0-degree Gemini point, where in degree theory it would be the Gemini, Gemini, Gemini. And we have the human and the non-human, that which couldn't experience itself as fully a child form, that which sought unconditional love, but upon the incarnation of that, the raven. If you think about this, the spouse of the dragon with Alcyon's story, everybody's mother was trying to help her, giving her golden hands, but she was looking for a husband, and and the husband was captured by some cult, and eventually he did meet his wife and embrace her, and so that they could have kind of like a physical child. And I think that there was another segment to that story, um, and this is where I have to go back to Tides of Thetis. Connected with Olivine, connected with, and by the way, when I was wearing Olivine, I was tortured at hospital, and then the nurse told me that she knows my father, and I was wearing Olivine, and she identified the Olivine. But I was also tested for my blood, which would later cause some certain things that, and later kind of like the people would try to convince me that my father doesn't love me or something like that, and then there would be difficulty with communication in the entire family, um, or that he thinks that I didn't see him as a father, like really things that came about. But it's kind of like the story where in the fourth house it can manifest also with one of the parents or parent-child relations, and this is where the kind of like the mother of the sun and the mother of the moon, they all gather and nobody really knows what to do. um, so this can be also stories where the entire, if I think about the myths here, we gather from Aboriginal to Hellenistic to Slavs. It's kind of like everybody gather, and this is also where one of these things where everybody gather to find a solution to something that has to do with occult, because there is good use of occult. It's kind of like something happened in the occult, and people are looking for the solution to that. And that of course can create a lot of people wanting to, well-intending, kind of like trying to bring even golden hands and chicks, but it's kind of like it's golden. There's nothing much to do with that, but it just try to bring whatever value they can offer, which was also the case of that serpent. It was kind of like the mother wanted a baby, even if it's a serpent. Came a serpent, she said, "Amazing." She wanted a baby, even if it's a serpent. It's a serpent. It's a baby. She wanted a baby. Amazing. The baby grows up, finds a spouse. If the serpent is looking for someone to love him, regardless of its form. She loves him regardless of his form. Suddenly becomes human and the most beautiful human, but only with his wife, who loves him regardless of his form. And the mother's like, "I grew that serpent. Can I see his face?" Now, this is happening only with the boy story, where we think about the girl form was transmuted into a dove in the sky. So we also think about one of the issues with what some people call ritual abuse, and some people call it training their children in the aristocracy and elite. It's kind of like the survivors of the things that is reserved only to the elite. Oh my god. um, it's kind of like you know, somebody grows to a tradition. They go to 7 to 33 gates of this, doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this, and then other people are like, we are survivors of that lord, that lord. uh, Kind of like me studying astrology only to find out, as I looked at the Islamic Golden Age, and of course the beauty of astrology remains, regardless of the original form, where it was used for ritual. And I'm like, what ritual? They sacrificed kids there, didn't they? And so, um, so we have Fennel, we have the connection to the eyesight. We even have Jung here and his red book for bibliomancy, where we have a man watering a dragon which has kind of like 7 flowers coming out of it. So the number 7. And the water is supposed to be the kind of like the Aquarian water, life water. I don't know what's Aquarian life water, was also connected with life energy, which is kind of like, oh, I thought that liquid is happening at Libra. And so, but we also have the notion that the issues of ritual abuse, sometimes it creates a boy within a girl and a girl within a boy, and this is also the Gemini, but with the kind of like the darker aspects, that those rituals are also sexual boundary violation of the infants, um, which are supposed to open the infant's brain to mind control or the existence of other consciousnesses. Malevolently, these things are used to commit crimes through the child, or traffic the child, and this is how people would experience being tempted by children that were basically raped in extortion cults, and then it would seem like the child is tempting them, where the child is mind controlled. Sometimes even the memory of the child would be kind of like unified with that consciousness, and it would also create certain behaviors of children that seem erotic, even though it is a child. And the consciousness of a child. I had the beginning of like the astral interference in there. Unfortunately, I was growing by my mom, which might not I guess by not talking about things I saw as a child prevented getting anybody who knows about these things to take me to the physical rituals. At least as far as I know, because in the physical rituals, the children are also perpetrators. And um, so, lizard dragon Hephaestus um, is was venerated by Cabaroi. Um, the Cabaroi were worshipped in mystery cult closely associated with Hephaestus. So again, we have the Greek, and then we have the contribution of Sasha Ravich to the Talisman of Tides of Thetis, which is no longer in stock, but the excerpts were um, listen closely, for we will only tell you once. You must remember that the way back is the way through, and going through means there is no way back. So we have this Zen-like duplicities, but we also have not wishing to tell it a second time. I remember I had a neurolinguistics teacher that was neurodivergent, and she could literally disappear, meaning she would be present in the room, and she would literally tone her visibility down. So I would go into the room, speak with my friend who had CP, and then suddenly she would join the conversation, and then suddenly I would notice her. And I was like, that person was not present just a second ago. They were in the room, their visibility was somehow toned down. And another thing that was an attribute, um, other than wearing particular clothes in particular day, was that she could never explain anything twice. It was a part of her neurodivergence. And so from her, I learned that, and I used it in astrology as well, that something is never ruling but involved in when it comes to neuroscience. Um, Now, there's also the notion of when people talk about the only way out is through, which is usually a gaslighting form for another horrid ritual that is meant to keep people under mind control. And this is where there's kind of like a grain of salt of caution to be taken with Alcyone and with Gemini, because this is literally the term in the first decan of Gemini where we don't know right from wrong yet. Listen closely, for we will only tell you once. There is a city beneath the crust of the frozen earth. Um, Again, a city beneath the crust of the frozen earth. Um, my immediate notion was Alaska, where I have my Rahu very closely geographically conjoined with where the Aboriginal tribes were, and I was also receiving like spiritual help from there, where Alaska is, and where the Arctic in general, but also where South Africa is, um, and particularly not South Africa, but the ocean is basically the Pacific. Particularly those points that are really not recommended to sail in. Green waters. I was thinking to open a channel called Green Waters. That and my Pluto 0 degree Scorpio, that's associated with people being flooded or feeling flooded, but also me feeling flooded for like the 3 decades of my life. Um, so listen closely, for we will only tell you once. In this palace, there is an atrium, which is kind of like the open space that really big castles have, or big like oligarch mansions. This round space. In this atrium, there is a chalice. Um, Listen closely, for we will only tell you once. In this chalice, there is an elixir, and its most prized things in the palace. So here we have this lore of, going into this place where sometimes they would sacrifice children, but there's an elixir of life there, which is the most prized things. And then we have the elixir is for seeing true as we see, seen as we do. Again, seeing true, seen as we do. Is it a cult-like expression, or is it an actual intuition expression? It is a milk which glows green, flamed, and bright. It kind of likes, it sounds radioactive. um, and if one washes their face in its unctuous broth, they too will possess our serpent sight. So again, there is a ritual that's supposed to turn one into a serpent. So it's basically also to do with shamanic journeying. But there's also the question of the two spirit. When we think about the two spirit, and if we think about the two, the what looks like a peace sign, which is the two fingers, but also if you look at the Baphometian, it's the two fingers, but not spread. Um, and the coercion to do with those is kind of like, is it a peace sign? Is it a two gender sign? Is it a two spirit sign? Is it a double agent sign? And also questioning, was the training of the shamans and the two spirits, which were supposed to be the healers, done by raping infants? And the question regarding the rituals of the training of the shamans, and the fact and the duplicity of going through both the women and the men experiences, and the fact that all across the globe we did not have a woman experience in this decade that did receive unconditional love. So we have an unprecedented across 9 millennia, and this is where Sedna comes in once in 9 millennia and reminds us that the male serpent had a woman that loved him and she couldn't be with him. And it's kind of like the twin flame stories, but then there was a woman that wanted power, and she was loyal to him, but she only wanted his power, and he sort of had to pick, discern between the two wives, not really having a memory or a recollection. It's also considered another thing that I received around this point, around the Uranus ingress, a little bit before, was the incarnation points, and the notion of the false light, but also the notion of the children that had, basically horrible torture done on them, so that they will incarnate while an adult person is there, so that they will incarnate, um, and in that way they would have the consciousness, um, across lifetime, with the sort of the game being rigged in favor. Again, there's a credit here that I'm still cautious about giving, because, like, I don't know if it's safe, for both of us. Um, so this is, um, and the need to be discerning even when dying, or, kind of like discerning where it's not possible. In the biblical 10 Commandments, there is the commandment around not coveting another's wife, which is kind of like a command on the thought. And we think about um, the type of things that we don't really know how to, we don't really know what is the effect, and we don't really know how to honor. And the fact that the when we think about, even when we talk about the risk of total extinction, or Adam and Eve, then we think about, before Adam and Eve there was Adam and Lilith, but we also think about the fact that, if there were two people, then they were like inbreeding, and indeed inbreeding is something that is characteristic to the beginning of a species, but also has to soon turn into biodiversity. This is also why a lot of beginner species go extinct, because they don't cross the inbreeding before they begin to and inbreeding creates mutation, and the form of Gemini being that mutation, um, that tries to polarize anyway. It tries to create the null and the zero and that polarity anyway. And this is where, we would have a duplication of wives, but also the challenge of meeting, of appeasing the feminine wish to have, um, basically a child self and an erotic sense of self, without being persecuted to being the shapeshift of a dove in the sky, of the unattainable erotic, and where the fulfilling the mate would be persecuted to the need to shapeshift. And if I think about going from Beta Per Se to Alcyone, and my own personal journey was being literally persecuted to, boom, I'm a child. And the environment kind of had to accept that, and me kind of having to, it's like 42 years old infant. and and the fear of existing in the physical form because of what happens to infants, and consequently the verbalism of Gemini that can be attributed to that very anxiety, and the oscillation between speech and speech impairment, or even avocality. The fear to exist and the fear to not exist, and kind of like, hey, until I actually want to live. Now, um, it is also a big shout out to Life Sefa when we talk about the healing professions. Chiron here is a wounded healer about everything Alcyone. So think about the wounded healer of an infant that never got to be a baby, an infant that could only be a boy if it wanted to be loved unconditionally. But what if it's a girl? She would have to be transmuted into a dove. She would have to die in her physical form. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, can a woman not be loved unconditionally? Can a girl not can it be, can it only sustain as a boy? Can this infant only be a boy? What if this infant is a girl? And um, in the background of people reconnecting with their natality, their natives cultures, their sovereignty as the native, and re-celebrating the myth. And Chiron here is also, when it comes to the healing professions, um, thinking about, I don't know, let's say an adult woman never got to be a woman. The more she tries to connect with her femininity, the more there's an infant that needs to be honored non erotically. And this is where even the Aboriginal origin stories did not have infants that grow into girls that don't have to be turned into doves to be saved from persecution for their desirability. And at the same time, the wonder about the rejection from the form, or needing to be loved regardless of the form, which can also mean the appearance, and at the same time needing to be beautiful, or needing to be seen as beautiful by the intimate partner, and even as the most beautiful, which is not exclusive to men. So, um, and this is where we can think about Gemini and the frog stories and the kissing of frog fairy tales. Um, and so um, Chiron wounds here have to do with just that, because we're likely to have, let's say, somebody or a man who is seeking to be loved regardless of his form, only to become the most beautiful, and the woman that wasn't even able to be loved in a way that is not violating her sexually, and had to shape shift into a form that is non-erotic, or that is non-erotic by, or that even if it is erotic, is on a table. So it's the dove in the sky. And think about that dove in the sky being that dove in the sky to, let's say, the dragon that needed to be loved unconditionally. And so, and all the mothers gathering for the woman that wanted to meet the her husband, but for the seven sisters, it would be the god whose vice was incest that turned them into doves, because Orion. I think it's Orion of Artemis, not Orion. Orion of I don't remember what was the connection with Orion there. I think it's connected with the Isis and Osiris story, but I know from Sirius. But Orion built, and then Orion actually. Remember when I was wanting to honor a currency on Sirius because there was this question about Orion and Orion channelings of Gigi Young that concluded that Orion was a place where there was a lot of diversity, and then another person that had to do with real estate. I don't remember the name, and he was going from honoring, let's say, the caliphate into doing emotional transmutation into a different type of self-help or spiritual practice. And he was talking about Orion as a place where there was slavery, and this was like, oh, that's definitely not what I want to establish. Definitely not around the currency. And then I hear the story about Orion himself raping the Sapien sisters that had to turn to Zeus, whose vice was incest, to turn them into birds in the sky, doves in the sky. It's kind of like even the incestuous Zeus was the savior for these women that were escaping Orion. And he agreed to turn them into doves. And it can also show of the dissociative property of Zeus, where it was like he was committing these offenses, but when women actually reached him out to help for desiring to not be raped, he did help them. And by the way, I may have had this such a story myself. Um, and Zeus can be also pedophilia by the way, any type of, even people watching OnlyFans are basically contributing to, because the way that these things are comprised are by the targeting of the infants and the torture of the mind controlled people to loss of sense of self. Um, and again, until that is not abolished, we cannot even talk about anything volitional going in that industry. And there were many cults associated with that, which can explain the many people that may have experienced being energy siphoned or kind of dark rituals done on them, because the essence of how they created the content creators was that. So this is, um, but here with this 0 degree Gemini, we meet both the um, outrightly malefic occultism as well as the duality of um, esoteric traditions that were saved for the elite and we would consider ritual abuse, and benevolent rituals that came out bad, and and the the very introduction and the unavoidant the inability to avoid the spiritual and the occultist. For example, having to defend from, let's say, an occult ritual went bad. There would be the thinking of how to fix it, which was the human touch of the dragon, for example. And the fact that the human touch is needed, which is where we learn that our human presence in this physical realm is needed to alleviate curses or to basically tether to tether to the spirits, but not lose our human touch, which can also be a form of veneration or a juncture of questioning when it comes to the esoteric and the occult, or relations of spirit and matter, um, and the shape shifting that happens as a result of not wanting to be raped, yet the wish to not necessarily not wanting to lose the erotic or the human form, which we only see through the boy here, and the girl never had that privilege. She was thrown into a dove, and we can try to think about what how can we assist the girl to also be loved unconditionally in this physical incarnation. Otherwise, we will keep having serpent boys, um, and no girls that can sustain, and we will keep looking for the human touch of the man without being able to contain or receive it, because we never got to. If we were the girls, then we never got to be loved unconditionally as both erotic and unerotic self. Um, and this is where the unattainable, um, the unattainable is what is supposed to be resolved with unconditional love, that incarnates the physical form, becomes the unattainable. There's a lot to do with um, both benevolent rituals that had turned created duplicity or an alternative, but a lot of why the initial incarnation of the dragon into the physical was not possible, um, was to do with what if that boy was a girl. Um, Now, that something is ancient doesn't mean that something is true. And this is what Sedna is here to remind us. 9 to 12 millennia, 12 millennia, Sedna hasn't been here. And this is where there's so many things that are possible that weren't possible before. Um, and when we consider the spiritual realm, we also want to think about the parent-child and the duplicity, whether it's having to parent our inner child, um, the inner infant that does need the parenting, the sovereignty that is necessary, and the issues around care. This makes for a very challenging Chiron placement. Um, and if we understand that the dragon is very associated, and the dragons go backwards. The dragon in astrology moves in retrograde always. The head of the dragon, the tail of the dragon, what we call Ra and Ketu. Of course, the dragons also have wings, which are let's say if it's, let's say around Gemini, then the wings would be Virgo and Pisces. Um, and the shedding of the skin property. By the way, fennel, in terms of aromatherapy, is used both as um, estrogen-like qualities, which is why we don't give anything estrogen-like to people that have anything tumor-like. For example, endo. Okay? um, and it is also connected to people that have issues with the mother. Let me read from the aromatherapy book. Hello, aromatherapy book. And by the way, I did order Angelica. They did not have it and they refunded me. So I'm waiting for the refund to reorder. Um, and I will further notify. I order nearly all the possible relevant to fungi essential oils, and then in one of the recipes was written fennel instead of another oil, but then I saw that it wasn't a mistake, and then I see fennel with Alcyone, so I was like, wait a second, should I have ordered fennel? So fennel essential oil is very good for headache that stems from digestion. Um, okay, basically it is good for people. Oh, it's against parasites. Okay, good for metabolism, liver functioning. For those who have excess progesterone, increases womb. Um, and this is what people call anise. We do not use it with hormonal treatment. It's good for people who cannot stop eating, but also for anorectic people. So eating disorders tells me immediately that it would be good for the sexual boundary violation issues, which means I need to order fennel. And it's good for people who have issues with the mother. It can increase appetite. Um, it tends to the emotional eating. So um, mm, 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 mm. Now for okay, what I'm told about endo is if we will give fennel essential oil, the woman will, or the man with the womb will receive. Now, people wonder, why do I still say man with the womb if it's about ritual abuse? Because I acknowledge the results of ritual abuse. That's A, and secondly, because I hold place for a duplicity that is not ritual abuse generated. So, because simply we would have to abolish ritual abuse to know, and this is why I hold place for both these options. Now, um, okay, so here I say that people do give phenol with and with endo, but they will have to decrease the pills. Um, it's not for pregnancy. But if there is any cancer to do with the hormones, like prostate or breast cancer, we rather not because of its estrogen-like quality. Now, but why for endo? Yes, probably the holistic perception is healing the mother issues, but that's also relevant to breast cancer. So I don't know. And somehow I don't understand. If everything is good with pregnancy, we do not give fennel because it's estrogen-like and can affect the fetus. Um, can assist regulating blood sugars. Um, more about this. I know that fennel is good for issues with the mother. Let's see, where was it written here? Yeah, good with people that have good with relations with the self, nature, and the parents. Okay, I need to go over this with a pen. And this is very connected to the connection to the snake and Alcyone here. Um, Releases fears. This is also what I felt with this. First of all, I had released my fear of the United States chart because its ascendant is actually on my Uranus and not my lot of death. That is, yeah, I don't know. I was really afraid of actually physically incarnating there. Um, and there were a lot of fears that were released when Uranus ingressed. It was kind of like a physical incarnation. Um, and even though I'm still dealing with things, there's something more honored there in its physical incarnation, um, relatively to. There are still issues that were experienced. Let's say there was the difficulty of being a girl that I definitely experienced, of the environment's reaction, where they see a girl and they immediately want to rape that girl. And they don't have a concept for not rape. And they would always try to justify it in whatever. So it's kind of like carrying in the Beta Per Se story, where just the desire to be, and also the form or the physical form, where the physical form could be very attractive or alluring, and the internal state actually needs to be of an infant state, or and at the same time the desire that erotic form will be honored with its yes no, and maybe once it is erotic, so once that child does grow, um, and this is how it's important to honor the non-erotic, and at the same time, um, the how should I say that? And this was also the confusion where it was about, well, wait a second, it's like no matter of the form not to be raped, which was the Beta Per Se story, and then the form is suddenly very attractive, um, and the existence, the inner state is of a child pre-erotic form, and then there are segments of eroticism that are sudden and unexpected, um, and need to be honored as well. So it's kind of like the erotic and non-erotic of the adult and of the inner child, and honoring the inner child, and all of these things were threatened altogether. And it's kind of like the reason I'm tending to that at 42 is because all these things were threatened altogether in infanthood. And this is, and then I relax by watching a Palestinian woman just sorting through all of their traumas, basically. And kind of hearing in the background, if that's what you're relaxing into, I don't want to know. And because that was diverting the attention from the inner tension, which Gemini is also associated with. Um, then there was also the wish to connect with my parents, and the fears around that, and the not knowing which fears are based and which not, and or what is it in my lineage even, um, lineages, okay, um, which is, by the way, very much associated, if I think about this, nervousness or agitation that is the needing physical closeness but mentally being elsewhere, that is actually associated with Dutch people that I didn't know about, um, and then it's kind of like being introduced into like the one of the most intimate facets. By the way, when I was ritually abused, I ran into that a lot, and suddenly it was like I wasn't the type to physically, it's very weird to say physical touch in the astral, but um, and then the life threat of connecting with the lineage, and a life threat of being of a lineage, um, and so. And it's safe to assume that with my biological father is the same. Their lineage is Jewish, and in Judaism there was like such children probably are to be murdered, or not, or like, which is to begin with a part of why I was growing. Let's say I was growing with my mom, but let's say the connection was not perpetually maintained. Um, so much so that I could have siblings where even the first book of my mother that wasn't published was about checking that one is not brother and sister. Well, in Israel, DNA tests are not possible unless the court. So, and to me, she said, if you date someone and is a slightly bit younger than you, always check a DNA so that you're not brothers and sisters. And so there was this sheer openness and willingness to confront all these issues, and find the reasonable solution. At the same time, the country doesn't allow for DNA tests, and the lineage would deem such child even murderable. Whereas all of my parents were secular at the time of my birth. They didn't come from secular, like my Dutch father wasn't coming from secular family, but Christlich as they were, the grandfather looked Jew. And he was a truck driver. So, and this is, um, by the way, I remember actually Adam Ellenbus was talking about how a lot of people from like the elite or the politics were very interested in astrology, which can explain a lot of my experience in the last 3 years, and then kind of like that the part of his profession was working with a lot of people there, and I was like, oh wait a second, so did you experience that too? And then this finally this relation with a person that I absolutely don't know coming through kind of like kind of like a forecast where I'm like, oh wait a second, so you also went to that. Oh wait a second, kind of like not really knowing if somebody, where is somebody on the scale of, you know, and so it's kind of like an annual week or something. And that is that deep relation that suddenly is formed by an experience that was definitely not supposed to be. And this is all together with all together with the needs for, let's say, the astrologic profession to be safe, or for relations to be no trauma bonds, and so on and so forth, uh, with the undeniable authentic relation. It's kind of like, hey, I know that what you're I know that I wait. And this is where um, um, the many things that come with that, together with the great anxiety, because that thing which we relate on the basis on is frightening. and, and this is also where I was shopping for some, let's put on I won't put on that, like some lavender and eucalyptus, and I was telling the cashier, just by casually in the conversation because I was laughing about it. This is only the complementary oils because nearly the stash of oils was kind of like retrieved because I need to tend to my own issues. And it almost looks like I'm opening a business, but no, it's for me. And um, this is where I begin to kind of like haphazardly tell her, yeah, I'm like an aromatherapist, but those things are actually for me. And this is where I say, well, I'm actually, since a decade, I was tending to kind of like the Me Too issue and then the ritual abuse issue, only recently to find out that I was the infant, and that affected me as well. And the fear, because this is kind of like a group where that group is still targeted, and then that filterless Gemini and excess verbalism, or what people call oversharing, and the many things that are pre-verbal that come about with that, with connecting the severing of the head of the dragon and the tail of the dragon, and kind of like my previous life and all of these notions, and my current incarnation, which is, raw maturation being 42, but also the current physical incarnation as that infant and that child, life full amidst, you know, so when we think about the serpent side is also an embodiment, and we're still in sidereal Taurus territory, but also zero Gemini, which is the most Gemini of Geminis. The excess verbalism, the oscillations of things that we can express and things that we can't, of expressing exactly the things we're not supposed to say. um, of going, ravishing about how terrible it is, and we must turn to secure attachment and so on, so forth, and having the most epiphany of trauma bonds with. It's kind of like, hey, you do experience that, and the lightness of this together with now Uranus brings a little bit of detachment that can allow us to experience more of the airy part of the eurekas, the shock of healing trauma. Is it the way it shocks people when somebody heals? Um, the the constant motion, the agitation, the nervousness that has to do with this decan, where we do, it's kind of like, hey, we know that is wrong. Also, this wrong is happening because of this wrong, and how do we prevent like these wrongs, and maybe we just have by tending to like, and there's a lot of creativity, learning a lot of things. Chiron here is thinking of the issues with the healing professions in that particular thing. Big shout out to Lida Sefan. She was addressing very authentically how the experience, even of being a reader or healer, um, or energy reader, which is healing, is communicating the energy, and then communication is healing in many ways. So um, basically, how one would think that they are the healer, where in fact meeting other people can confront them with something not being one-sided, or healing itself not being one-sided. Now, because I had the privilege of studying holistic aromatherapy, I knew that I intuitively knew that if I run into a person and something comes up, um, let's say I speak to someone and I see geranium oil, then I buy geranium oil, or they have an issue and I see that is relevant to me. That is not something that is irrelevant to me. What I prescribe to them, or when I in the little time where I used to prescribe and prepare essential oil blends, then I would say it comes open. Don't fear it, because I'm the person that takes the first drop, and on that I write on the oil. Later, I of course seal it, but